Jeff Bezos punts on the Washington Commanders for now. Will he set his sight on the Seahawks? That the head and subhead from the story from Teddy Schleifer from Puck News, who joins us now. Teddy, thanks for blowing up our show rundown today. We genuinely appreciate it. Happy
to sow a little chaos.
Yes, absolutely. So let me ask you the very simple, straightforward question to get us started here. What changed from Jeff Bezos? What did you learn that made you say, it goes from everyone fears Bezos, he's looming, he's lurking, to he's not going to bid on this team?
Both those things can be true. I think there was a lot of paranoia around a Bezos bid from other bankers around the deal, from the other bidders. I don't think anything about the kind of atmospherics around a Bezos bid have changed at all. And frankly, I don't even know if this story will change any of that. There still is going to be, paranoia until the ink is dry, from a Josh Harris or another bidder. I think people should read this reporting closely. We're not saying that, Jeff Bezos will not be the owner of the Washington Commanders and all is said and done. We're saying as of right now, he's currently not planning on submitting a bid. Which, could always change, sure. As of now, though, I would bet on it not happening. And the paranoia that surrounds Bezos is, to some extent, founded, right? Because this is a guy who, to some extent, doesn't really need a lot of energy to get a bid over the finish line. Creating liquidity for him would not be difficult. He knows where to find Dan Snyder. It's not difficult to make this deal happen pretty quickly if his mind does change. But as of right now, it's not, a bid is not being prepared.
I guess that's kind of the question, of the crux of this then, is what's the impetus for the story, right? Was he leaning towards it? Was he considering it? And then he's like, no, probably not. And then why is he leaning towards not at this time?
I'll be honest, I don't have all the details at this point. I think some of, the way that journalism works, right, is you're sort of just getting, it's iterative, right? You get right. A little bit of reporting at a time. I don't have a great answer for you on kind of what changed. I reported over the last couple of weeks that, Bezos was definitely interested in owning a team. I've reported that, he even talked with Snyder at one point over the last couple of months. He obviously hired Allen & Co. bankers. So this was not speculative, is Jeff Bezos interested? Who knows? He was taking active steps to try to purchase the team, or at least to explore purchasing the team. And ultimately, as of right now, he's currently not planning to do that. So why that is, I'm happy to speculate, but I just want to be clear that I would be speculating.
No, totally understand. Teddy Schleifer from Puck News is with us. And I think when the most interesting thing prior to this that you reported is that they had met, because there was this idea that they hated each other, that they're just bashing each other, whether overtly or, to friends or subtly through the press. And I just wonder, I understand this is getting into the speculative zone. If you're Bezos and all of that stuff is kind of happening on the periphery, even if you had a one-on-one conversation with Dan, are you not interested in this team because of all of the hoopla around it? It's just complicated, all that kind of stuff? Or is it more of he got into the books, he saw it, he's obviously a good businessman because he's one of the richest people in the world, which I guess isn't always true that that's the case. But in his case, he seems to be a decent enough businessman that he's built a $200 billion empire. And he's like, I don't think this is probably the right financial move or whatever business reason that would go. Is it, I guess to boil that down to a simpler question, is it personal? Sure. Is it business?
Look, there's been kind of, I would say, contradictory reporting in aggregate about whether or not Snyder would welcome a bid by Bezos. I think it was The Athletic reported that he wouldn't, and then Charlie Gasparino of Fox Business is saying that's overblown. I don't entirely know, whether or not Dan has formally, forbidden Jeff from placing a bid or from getting close to this. I'm speculating here, but at the end of the day, I think it kind of comes down to the math, right? If Jeff was offering $7 billion and Josh Harris is offering $6 billion, is Snyder really going to turn down an extra $1 billion because he doesn't like, stories that are written in the Washington Post? That feels unlikely to me. But yeah, another possibility here for sure is that, Jeff, did not think this made sense as a business strategy. But look, I mean, I don't know. I feel like what you see is what you get with the Commanders financially here, right? I mean, obviously there's the stadium X factor, but you know what the media deals look like. If you're Jeff, like, are you really learning that much from the NBA? I mean, I'm sure I'm going to be criticized by bankers and lawyers who are paid exorbitant fees for this advice, but like the business kind of is the business. And I don't know if it's really that complicated. Easy for me to say in the chief seats. I understand that. So at the end of the day, maybe it has to do with the fact that, right, the Seahawks could be available in a couple of years. Like, Jeff was not really that interested in the Commanders specifically, is my sort of read on this. Like, he wants to own an NFL team. There are only so many NFL teams that come available, right? Obviously, Josh Harris, for instance, been on the Broncos a couple of years ago. Like, does Josh Harris love the Commanders versus loving the Broncos? Or is it just like, you want to own a team and there's only 32 opportunities and it's very illiquid and, you'd be foolish if you want to own a team not to bid on every single one. So I don't necessarily think it was like a Commanders obsession for Jeff, and maybe if it was, maybe he would be actually bidding on it.
Teddy Schleifer from Puck News with us. I have a very TMZ question, but you've referenced this in reporting, so I'm just going to ask it. A part of Bezos' interest in football, he says it's his favorite sport, but he also, his girlfriend, Lauren Sanchez, who is the ex-wife of Tony Gonzalez, who, according to your reporting, is someone that Bezos considers a friend, like it's her favorite sport too. How's that all work? How's that work that Lauren Sanchez and her ex-husband are both friends of Jeff Bezos, or like that they're all friends? How's that work?
It's not TMZ. I mean, I think it's very relevant to the storyline. Bezos, obviously got this very high-profile divorce from Mackenzie Scott a few years ago, and has very much kind of remade his life around Lauren. You just need not look any further than their Instagrams to get a snapshot of the middle-age love that they have found, and good for them. Lauren has talked publicly about sort of this, I think she called it like a Brady Bunch kind of family, where I believe she and Tony have a kid together. I believe that's true. Maybe, I think it's one kid. Someone can fact check me on that. So it's a very blended family. Jeff obviously has kids with Mackenzie from the prior family, and Lauren Sanchez is on very good terms with Tony Gonzalez, and like, this is public, right? I mean, you see sometimes on Thursday Night Football, which of course Tony Gonzalez is one of the guys in the field, but you see Lauren and sometimes Tony and Jeff all at games together. It's a blended family, or Brady Bunch element, as Lauren calls it.
And doing the fact check here, they do have one son together.
One kid, okay.
And then he's got, I think, if I'm reading this correctly, 3 others from his
first wife.
Yeah. So there you go.
Yeah.
Okay. So that now leaves what is kind of the remaining question. And I know you've been super locked in on Bezos, but like, you cover all of this. You're locked into the billionaire class as well as anyone. And Josh Harris is seemingly, according to, if you kind of do the aggregate of all the reporting, the guy that is in big time driver's seat here. Steve Apostolopoulos, or as I call him, because everyone keeps giving me different pronunciations of his last name, Canadian Stephen A. He is trying to put together a bid, but it doesn't seem like it's going to pass the NFL's muster. Like, what is the path forward now here? Also knowing, according to the reporting that you put out today, that Dan could circle back around to Jeff Bezos at the end and be like, all right, man, last chance. And then Bezos could go, well, okay, in that case, here's your check.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, look, to some extent, you could argue that, none of the facts have really fundamentally changed, right? Which is that Josh has always sort of been in the driver's seat. He has a fully financed, $6 billion bid. The Steve Apostolopoulos, I don't know how you pronounce it. Actually, I'm going to call him Steve. The Steve bid, is at 6, but like, I know there's some question with the financing there. I think Josh Harris is still the favorite for this thing. And that hasn't really changed. He has a bid that looks like a conventional bid, and it's been, checks all the right boxes. He's got kind of this consortium of well-wishers and celebrities, and Josh has owned a professional sports franchise before. So this is not it's a safe path, to take Josh's bid. Does not require reassessing the conflict of interest policy with like media deals, like I think taking a Jeff bid would. So it's sort of simple. And if Snyder wants to get back wants to circle back with Jeff at the very end of this, that obviously is still on the table. But, I think if you're betting on, on predicted or whatever the equivalent is, I don't think this is a DraftKings betting line, but, I feel like you would.
We're a BetMGM show personally, but that's fine.
There you go. Can you bet on who wins an owner?
I don't think that's on the book in our place, but somewhere.
I mean, the Josh Harris line, is looking pretty inviting at this point.
Do you think from what you've been able to garner that it will get done by these owners meetings coming up in May, which is kind of what the NFL is certainly hoping?
Yeah, I don't have a great sense on that. I mean, I think people who kind of are better sourced in the league would have a better sense on that. But I mean, it definitely is crunch time here. Snyder obviously is only committed technically to like reviewing strategic transactions or whatever bullshit he said. So he theoretically could, take this as long as he wants. But as of right now, I feel pretty confident that like this is going to get done at some point. The Josh bid is. I think this could be done quickly if you really wanted to. It's really a question of not logistics, but of, Dan Snyder, sipping a tequila on the beach and deciding what he wants to do with his life. I mean, that's I don't know how long that takes, right? I mean, that sort of depends on how neurotic any of us are. It doesn't really depend on business.
Yeah. Teddy Schleifer is with us from Puck News. Real quick on that front, because that is something I've heard as well, kind of in I don't want to call it reporting that I'm doing, just talking to a bunch of people who are covering this, both in radio interviews like this or, just kind of talking to people off air, is that this sale has been so bizarre because of Dan and that he is just a different person. He operates in his own way, on his own schedule, doing things that make absolutely no sense to other people. And like sometimes simple things like getting a response to an email or getting him to pick up the phone for a very basic functional thing has been incredibly difficult. Have you heard things like that throughout this process? Or is that something that has escaped your purview so far?
Yeah. I haven't heard that. That's very interesting. Tell me more. What's this like? Is that just kind of his personality, or what do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I don't want to go too deep into it, in part because it's not my original reporting, right? Like I don't want to be spilling what other reporters are perhaps working on or what they haven't obviously put out with enough confidence that they're reporting it themselves. But the general sense I get from talking to multiple people covering this, and I've had multiple people say this to me who are covering this, is that he just kind of does things his own way. That, if a simple, hey, we needed the signature on this file is the kind of thing that used in a different sale, in the Broncos sale, would get done in a day because you call the person, they do it, and that's their job. That getting a hold of him, it can be incredibly difficult. And that is one of the reasons why this process has been so much slower. And I would say for those of us covering it, specifically here in D.C. from a very local, like fan-driven level, has been incredibly frustrating because it's been drawn out. Because some of the kind of basic dotting of I's, crossing of T's, that is just the simple run of play in other business transactions is incredibly difficult to do with him because he's just bad at doing all this stuff.
Absolutely. That makes sense. I mean, look, easy for us to say. Neither of us have been, billionaire owners of an NFL team. And I imagine, for Dan, who's, his wife Tanya, who owned this franchise for 20, 25 years, letting go is hard. I thought about selling my car, and I've wasted more time on that than I have on Dan Snyder trying to sell this NFL team.
Yeah, I mean, another thing that I've said all along that folks need to remember is like his entire identity was being the owner of his team, and to give up on your identity is something that's not going to go on easily. But it's his fault, so there's that. Also
the bit to make this, not to reduce this just to dollars and cents, but I think the feeling around sports franchises in general is that these are sort of inflation retardant assets
right.
That at a time when it just feels like sports franchises, because of obviously limited supply, like keep going up and up in value. So if you're Dan, you're selling this in 2023 for $6 million. Like, what if you look dumb in 10 years for not selling it for, $600 billion or something? I'm joking, but like, something greater, 10 years from now, or giving it to the kids, or, who knows what kind of games you can play with from a tax perspective. I mean, so it's not only a sense of like belonging, but I think there's also a sense that, maybe it's just bad business sense to sell it right now. Though, Dan obviously has political and regulatory and legal reasons why, he might want to consider selling. But from a business perspective, it's not just kind of psychological. I think there's actually a feeling that, you should sell this to the best bidder, and the best bidder might be in 10 years.
Right. And he obviously, if it's up to him, he keeps it. And even if he doesn't get to do anything and Tanya runs it, he gets to give it to his kids, which was always his goal. But it seems that, the consequences of his actions, they're coming to get him. Speaking of that, though, like the general kind of market right now, as you look at the folks that you cover, and again, Teddy Schleifer, who is a writer for Puck News, who covers. Am I describing your beat correctly? You essentially cover billionaires. I
cover rich people who want to buy teams.
Right.
I mean,
but also other things, right? And it's one thing to look at the Angels and their sale, which they were pulled off the market, or Manchester United is in a really weird spot right now, which is perhaps the best comparison for the Commanders, because although it's a different country, different league, whatever, like you're talking about a legacy franchise that when it happens, depending on the order that these two teams sell, is going to be the most expensive sports transaction in the history of the world. So like the fact that has kind of slowed down and been an interesting one to watch, but also if you look at other, big giant M&A type of things, or companies being bought out at these kinds of prices, what is the kind of bigger picture market in terms of the business side of this right now?
In terms of all teams, you mean? Like all sports?
I would say all teams, all sports, and anything else that someone buys for $6 billion.
I mean, look, I think the one big trend that's happening right now is wealthy people who want to buy, or want the fun, frankly, of like being a professional sports owner, or like going into things outside of the four major professional sports. With MLB, NHL, NFL, NBA, there's 120, 125 teams. And how many sales are there a year of these things? Like 3 or 4? Like what? I mean, the Suns were just up. I think the Timberwolves were up a couple of years ago. And you're seeing people, like lots of wealthy people, get into like Formula One teams, right? Or a big storyline in the world of billionaires is women's soccer. Lots of wealthy people, like Sheryl Sandberg is involved recently in creating a women's professional soccer team in the Bay Area. So you're seeing wealthy people go outside of the four major sports. You're seeing billionaires go into like esports too, right? I think there's just a limited number of teams, and when people buy these things, partially for tax reasons, they're unlikely to sell, and so they want to pass it to their heirs. And you really only see kind of major sales when there's some like scandal, right? Like Robert Sarver or Don Sterling or Dan Snyder. I mean, that's when you see these things actually happen. So that's a big trend right now, and is that these assets are you're sort of seeing leakage to non-professional or non-major sports leagues. And I think that's going to continue. That's part of the reason why lots of these leagues are considering expanding, right? There might be a new NBA team in the next couple of years. Who knows? Maybe the NFL will expand at some point. Like there's lots of business reasons to make the leagues bigger. Part of that is you can invite in a whole new team with a whole new owner, and that pushes up its supply and demand. You create greater demand for these teams, and greater supply, and suddenly you're talking real money.
Yeah, and meanwhile, Kathy Engelbart over the WNBA is like, we don't want to fail. Like, Kathy, wake up. Hello. All right. Last thing I want to ask you, though, is where does this leave Bezos? Because now he's still a guy who's got more money than basically everybody else on the planet, and he would like to own an NFL team according to things he's telling people and has been telling people for a long time. But it's not going to be this one. The Seahawks are still out there. That doesn't get rid of the Amazon conflict issue, which I know you talked about with Sheehan. We actually played that bite on the show. I think it was yesterday, 2 days ago. But that's still looming as an issue for him. Where does that leave Bezos if he indeed doesn't change his mind and doesn't buy the Washington Commanders?
Yeah, I would expect, the Seahawks to be definitely in Bezos' sights. I'm not an expert on that situation. My understanding is like Jody Allen has to sell in a couple of years, right?
Yeah.
Okay, right. I know it had something to do with kind of the trust situation with Paul Allen. So, that's a possibility. I could see it's sort of hard to tell like when these teams will come up. I mean, I will say, Bezos is only like 55, and he is in a moment in his life right now where he is doing sort of almost reinventing his kind of routines, right? He bought the Washington Post in 2013. He is, recently spent a couple of days at the Post building, like trying to tend to kind of the crises there. He's gotten very involved with philanthropy. He started a climate change fund recently, along with a network of kind of Montessori preschools. So, like, it's not as if he's, like, sitting around all day, like, moping about his inability to get an NFL team, right? He's got other stuff going on. He's still the executive chair and largest shareholder at Amazon. But I think the next beat in this saga is, like, I wouldn't be surprised if there was a final, hey, are you buying this team sort of conversation, in the next couple of weeks. And I also wouldn't be surprised if, Bezos is the front runner for the Seahawks in a couple of years. So that's the next step.
Teddy, this was great. Very much appreciate your time, your insight, great reporting, and I'm assuming when you do more, we'll be back in touch and have you back on the show.
Thanks so much.
All right, Teddy Schleifer, everybody, from Puck News. So that's super interesting because in a lot of ways, Teddy was like, yeah, there's not a lot that's changed. He's just, leaning harder in one direction, but not. It's kind of like, hey, I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what I'm going to do. Probably not, but maybe. And now we're just closer to the deadline. And so it's going to involve a change of heart for him to ultimately get in on this. But it's kind of like when you are thinking about going somewhere. You're like, yeah, I'm thinking about it. Like, I don't know. Like, we'll see. And in the back of your head, you're not leaving your house. You never even got dressed for that party. You were never going. That's kind of what this feels like. Could you at the last minute? Your crush, you find out they're going to be there? Or whatever other thing might motivate you to go? Whether it be positive motivation, something that you're looking forward to, or guilt. Oh, God, I've canceled on them the last 3 times. Oh, I better put pants on. That's kind of what this feels like. That at the end, it's like, hey, you sure you don't want to come? Yeah, I'm good. I'm gonna stay home. And we're closer to that conversation, or maybe that conversation has happened now. It's just that the party doesn't start for another couple of hours.
This is The Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.